The other thing that's important to, like, is specialising and having a direct relationship with the end user in some way, is that it makes farming more enjoyable to have those relationships. So to understand where what you're producing is going, where it's going, and what's being made from it. The relationships are important, but also it just gives a greater satisfaction to me anyway. So, other than having a viable business and growing a few things in the paddock, those relationships are really important, and not just in the local community, but across our industry. Yeah.
Welcome to Sustainable Tables podcast, Seed to Table. My name's Jade Miles, and we'll be talking with game changers and change makers regenerating food and farming in Australia from the ground up. So today we are thrilled to be chatting with Jason Cotter, who is the owner and operator of Tuerong Farm, which is a 60-hectare mixed farming enterprise down on the Mornington Peninsula. Jason grows and mills, actually, heritage, ancient and modern grains, and has been testing diverse lines and increasing the seed of various cereal grains available to the craft brewing, distilling and baking industries over the last few years. As a result of this, he's collected hundreds of species or specialist lines from gene banks and breeders around the world. Tuerong Farm includes an on-farm mill, which is where he's joining us from today, and bakery, as well as trials of various wheat strains tailored to specific end uses and unique climates of the peninsula. In 2020, Jason was awarded a Nuffield Farming Scholarship, and that has allowed him to research alternative grain markets and genetics. Now, Jason isn't doing all of this alone. He lives and works on the farm with Emma Hicks and their two children, Clementine and Clancy. Let's take a few steps back, because I would love to understand, you don't bite this off, or you don't land in this by accident, you bite this off intentionally. What was it that really, way back when, made you think, I need to do something and I need to look at this slightly differently to perhaps the way others are?
Yeah, well, we started growing crops here. We've got a farm that has wine grapes and beef cattle. We're in a peri-urban area. We've got a rural outlook, but we're very close to a population centre on the Mornington Peninsula. And it's probably one of the few places in Australia that has that rare opportunity of having agritourism that works and smaller land holdings that can operate value-added businesses successfully without reaching too far into other markets. So we supply grain and flour to local bakers and other end users and into the city as well. I didn't sort of set out to do that. I didn't draw up a plan on the back of an envelope and think, oh, that sounds like a good business. It was more, I'd returned here to live, and I had another business that wasn't in agriculture, and it almost seemed that agriculture was going to skip my generation, other than having a small hand and being a landholder. But then I started reading about localised grain economies and localised food systems, and I was also interested in making my own bread. Read about how far bread had really drifted from what bread actually is, and put some wheat in just for a bit of fun and to see how it would go. I don't think wheat had been grown on the Mornington Peninsula for, I don't know how many decades, but perhaps 100 years, I don't know. I also had a dog at the time that was a quail dog, and I wanted the quail to stay longer into the season so I could train my dog. And so I thought I'll just chuck in some wheat, and didn't know how it would go. I thought I might get something off it. It grew really well. And you typically think of the wheat belt as something quite distant from a population centre and not in a higher rainfall zone like the peninsula, and definitely not in the small pockets of land that we have here.
That scale.
You think 60 hectares, it's essentially the house paddock of a wheat farm in the Western District. I guess, but because of that, as I enjoyed growing the wheat and I'd solved a few problems on how we're going to harvest it and what have you, it just happened to coincide when people were wanting more direct relationships with farmers and a say in how things were produced. And this was particularly driven by bakers. So we had a market there that we were close to town. We had a few interested bakers, and we met various different people in that part of the food culture where I live. So I grew some grain again. We imported some small equipment from overseas that enabled us. So I always think that the sort of local grain economy in our context, it's been enabled by globalisation in some way, that we were able to find equipment that suited our scale and import it ourselves. Then we were able to harvest, clean, and ultimately mill grain. Brewing and grains for malting hadn't really occurred to me at that point, and we started supplying flour to bakers. And then, because of our scale, we had to specialise and value add. So hence the flour, and in more recent years, it's also bread. We have an on-farm bakery too. And the other way I thought we would specialise is diversifying what we grew. So within wheat, within barley, within rye, there's huge repository of different types and genetics. The wheat genome's 5 times larger than the human genome. There is a phenomenal breadth of traits and types and morphologies to explore. And I guess combined with being someone who's a collector of things, I started looking at other wheats and trends overseas that were looking at diversity on what people grew. And that diversity looked at growing for specific climates. So mostly wheat and barley and rye in Australia is bred for broad adaptation, just for industrial efficiency in the commodity market. It's not really bred anymore for smaller localised areas and more nuanced conditions. And that's great if you're in a commodity system and you can find something that grows everywhere. But there are things that grow better in our higher rainfall zone and our particular microclimate. With that diversity, there's also other things that come with it that speak to different end-use traits. So most grain in Australia really doesn't consider end-use that much, other than meeting particular performance characteristics. And it doesn't look at flavour or digestion values, say in a flour product. It doesn't look at differences. Processors tend to just impose their process upon whatever raw material they get, rather than let the grain carry its identity through to the end product. So we found, having grown lots of different things over a number of years, that grain has very distinct qualities that you don't typically think about. You think, oh, wheat is wheat is wheat. Well, it's not. There's so many types, and with each of those, there are things that work better in, say, a low input system, things that offer different flavour profiles, and things that I really wanted to explore on our farm to make it work as a value-added business.
I'm intrigued. I mean, we grow apples, and so I get it. People think that an apple is a floury thing that sits in your fruit bowl year round, and it's lost its shine. It's lost its sheen. Wheat is a little bit the same. It's kind of the thing that sits as the baseline to about 80% of the meals that we eat. We don't really know anything about it. None of us are that interested in it. It becomes really benign. But actually, when I first met you, we were at the Grains conference.
Oh, yes.
And I remember standing in, I don't know if it was yours or somebody else's, but every possible colour, shape and size of a wheat grain that you could imagine was available on this table. And it really blew my mind to realise that, just like I'm passionate about apples, you and others are passionate about wheat grain.
Yep.
And, we've just sadly lost the infatuation we have with differing genetics and the capability of a single grain to be used in completely different ways for completely different purposes.
Well, yeah, infatuation's a good word, really, yeah. As well as the grains themselves, the wheat plants have a huge diversity of morphology as well. So it's really something else to be in a field that has that diversity in it. I mean, I love nice tabletop of monoculture wheat as much as the next farmer, but I love more having a heap of diversity, whether that's in a trial site or whether that's in a population. And you can grow wheat not as a monoculture, you can grow it with that diversity inherent in one field. But yeah, we kind of don't often think about concepts of beauty in agriculture, or we ignore them. And beauty can often be a guiding principle to ensure that we do have diversity in what we do. I definitely enjoy that part of it. And the business side of me definitely tells me every year when we're sowing different things to sort of tone it down a little, because we have grown hundreds of types in a single year before, and it gets a bit out of control, and you end up having storage issues the following year because you've got so much of different things. So I do try and control the diversity of what we grow, but there are people I work with sort of laugh every year when I say that in meetings and whatever, that I end up going, oh, we've got a little bit of ground, let's just chuck a bit of this in.
The landscape is your palette.
Yeah.
So tell us, for those who don't quite follow what you're saying, ordinarily a monoculture would be a single variety of wheat going into the ground, but that's actually not how you tend to plant. Talk us through how you're creating the pellets in front of you.
Look, we do grow single varieties and single origin wheat. So this one particular variety grown in one particular location, and we carry that through, I guess, preserve that identity through the end product, so through to the flour or the malt or what have you. We definitely do that. We have chosen things that aren't within the commodity system now. So we used to grow wheat that was available to everybody, and then we slowly bulked up things that we'd collected from, even 5 gram samples that we've imported or got from gene banks. And it takes probably, if everything goes well, you can turn 5 grams into 50 tons in 5 years. You just got to grow it every year. So when we grow something, we see if we like it, and we also see whether it's applicable to end use, and we see if it grows well at our place and whether it has some agronomic traits, but also some added quality traits that aren't typically considered in the commodity market. We've also been growing in populations. So rather than grow a monoculture, you grow different types in the same field, or you grow what's called a composite cross population. So you combine a lot of varieties that have been crossed together, and they maintain an inherent diversity from year to year. And over time, that population of genetics becomes better suited to the land on which it's grown, and becomes, I guess, what you might call a land race that's suited to your country, because what has grown well gets grown again and generates more seed and what have you. So when you do have that diversity in the paddock, it's lovely to see that in the paddock, but it's also this agronomic benefit. So it spreads risk for a farmer. So, for example, you might have particular frost risk. If you've got things that have slightly different flowering times, or that you might have disease risk, say like a particular rust, if you have diversity in your field, when those risks turn up, they might not affect every plant in the field. In fact, they are unlikely to. So while they may affect some, over time, and this is farming without extensive inputs, like fungicides and what have you, what happens over a 10-year period is that your yield is stable over a long period of time, and in fact it's improved, and also your use of inputs is far lower, so it's less costly, because natural diversity is handling those risks. I'm not explaining this very well, but if your plant has a particular flowering window, and if that window is a little bit broader because there are different types that flower at slightly different times, then when there is a frost that sticks around, it doesn't affect everything in your paddock. You don't lose the whole lot. The same thing carries through to diseases. If you get a disease in a monocultural paddock, unless you break out the boom spray and put out the fungicide prophylactically, it's going to affect everything, which will affect your grain package, your grain fill, your grain yield, and ultimately the quality of your crop. When you have some diversity in there, when a particular pathogen turns up, it won't affect everything. In fact, it'll shape the population that you have so that what you're growing can better handle the conditions in which it's grown.
I think in Australia, there's predominantly 1 or 2 varieties of barley, wheat and rye that are used. But with this limited selection of grain varieties, we've got a limited flavour palette as well. Can you unpack what you're hoping to change?
Yeah, so at the moment, barley in Australia, there's one variety that dominates, which is Planet, which is a French bred barley. It yields really well. It fits the performance characteristics for malting, and it's been a real win for a lot of farmers across a broad swathe of land. However, what you can get out of that as an end user, like a brewer or a distiller, is pretty much a similar thing with a few tweaks here and there that the maltster can achieve or the brewer can achieve. It's also to deny that the grain has its own quality that you can carry through from the paddock through to its end use. So having had
a bit like grapes.
Very much so. Yeah, we don't sort of think of wheat, barley, rye, all the cereals we often just consider as a substrate for imposing something else on, rather than as a key ingredient that has its own identity and qualities. And having malted, distilled, brewed different grains, even in the last 6 months, there is an inherent thing within the grain that comes from both its genetics and how it's grown and where it's grown and the season in which it's grown, that comes through in the end product. In fact, we've been tasting some distilled barleys and some other grains this year as new make. So you malt a grain and it gets brewed and then it gets distilled. That flavour is like markedly different between grains that are undergoing essentially the same process. In the wine industry, you speak of terroir and what have you, but usually you think, oh, well, you distill something, you brew something, it gets denatured in some way. It just doesn't. In fact, you can tell what it's going to be like as a whiskey, as the new make, before it even gets in a barrel. It doesn't all happen in the barrel. It comes from the grain. So
if you imagine where it came from in the beginning of time, when we started to drink beer in our deeply localized locations, we all would have had particular grain varieties and flavored beers in particular zones or regions that we belonged to. And so that would have been a key part of the flavor profile, would have been a key part of your sense of place.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I mean, you can still get that in parts of the world, and it'd be great to reinstate or have that kind of thing in Australia too. Our seed producing seed companies now, we've basically in cereals, there's 4 of them. There used to be breeding stations all over Australia. It was just a bit unwieldy to manage, but it meant that your local agricultural station was breeding things specific to your environment, so it was good for farmers. But you look at Czech or other places where beer maintains importance. Every town's got its own brewery that's not even considered a craft brewery. It's just the beer that we drink here. It's from local grain, and to be able to do that in Australia is a fantastic thing that people have definitely cottoned onto. They want to support their local businesses. So you have a local flavour, you have a local business, the people that produce it, the farmer that provided the grain. You also hold the money and value of that product within a local community, and so everyone benefits from it. I mean, it's sort of a sidetrack perhaps, but I think it's very important when we're spending our money. If you're spending, particularly at the moment, locally, it's holding that wealth in your community. It's a significant thing to do.
It really is. Our local brewer would be one of our biggest supporters of our sporting clubs and our primary school. And, they're the first to put their hand up and say, I'm doing okay, so I'll make sure I share that with the community that supports me. So it's just that beautiful circular economy that happens when we deeply localise.
That's the word, circular economy, yeah. I guess for us, the difficult aspect of it is that when you're value adding or specialising, it can create work for yourself. So if we're growing, cleaning, milling, baking, having things malted, what have you, you think, oh, that's great, we'll capture the value across all these things and it'll shore up our business's viability, and it does. It's great, but also it does create a fair bit of work in that you've taken on three roles instead of one. So
that's right.
To sort of manage that, well, I think we're getting there, but yeah, it is something to be mindful of. And there are areas of my interest that I got to pursue, and I think there's in our business that I can delegate things now, or in a position where I can do that, and that may help with our management of the various aspects. So, yeah.
It's the complexity of small scale farming, isn't it? You need you need a diverse range of business arms to actually make yourself viable. But in doing that, you then need to become an expert across a whole manner of different fields, which can be really compromising on the one or maybe two things that you really started the whole enterprise for in the first place.
Yeah, your attention gets drawn away. Like the milling or the bread, as we've been setting up the bakery in the last 2 years, my involvement's less and less there now, which is great. But it does take away from the bits that I'm more interested in, which is growing a diverse number of things. And so you still do those things, you just don't do it as well as you might.
You're a bit stretched. Your eyes off the prize.
That's
right.
I
want to ask the question, because for people listening, they're exploring and trying to understand the difference between regenerative, biodynamic, ecological, organic? What phrase do you use that explains your growing practice methods?
Yeah, it's a lot to wade through. For us, I mean, we've typically used sustainable and low input. And for me, sustainability covers off a few things. So environmental and economic and community and social. So, our business is surviving and thriving in a local context, that we're also looking after our place. What might work in someone's business or on their land might not work for someone else. But I think it's just having a very considered approach to what you do, and not looking at any particular ideology, but going, oh, that's interesting, they're doing this, maybe that'll work for me. And if everyone's focusing on soil health, and for us that means basically improving soil biology and carbon and water holding capacity in our soil. Our soil doesn't hold as nutrition as well as I'd like it to. So if we can improve those things, then we're going to have more resilient crops. And regardless of whatever system you're growing in, if you're making considered choices that improve your soil, then that's going to carry through to what you produce. And for me, it's important to be able to measure that over time as well, and measuring that through what you produce. So working out what facets you'd like to look at in your crops, and then measuring it every year, and then looking at how the season went, how you were farming, what you did, and how you achieved a particular result, and then comparing it over time.
I would like to move us to talking about the project that the Good Grain Fund has funded.
Yeah.
And what benefits you think the diversification of grain varieties might have more broadly on the brewing sector?
Well, there'll be more to choose from, and different malts and flavours to explore. I think these days, we might be growing, one or two types in Australia, and there is, a maltster that does provide some different options for people. But a lot of the options that are available to brewers are imported malted products. So, I mean, there's one variety that it comes from the UK that has a lovely flavour profile that really appeals to brewers, but they have to import that from a long way away. There's a freight of environmental challenges attached to that. And generally, businesses want to appeal to their customers and their own sense of what's right to grow things and to use products that are locally produced.
Yeah, I would say most people don't know that that's the reality of where their craft beer is coming from.
No, well, if you've got a brewer that wants to do something that's got a particular flavour profile, they might not always be able to achieve that with a locally malted product. And I guess we're hoping to offer some newer choices for brewers, and for it not to have a freight of costs attached to it.
Yeah. So when the table that I referred to earlier with all the different varieties on it, what was I looking at? 20, 30, 40 different varieties?
Yeah, maybe. We had a table of different heads and some, so there's more than that. Last year we grew probably 30, 40 different barleys just to look at them and see what they were like. Ones that just hadn't been grown for a long time. I was particularly interested in some two-row malting barleys, but also some hull-less barleys, the ones that you can eat. Like barley's, actually, we should be eating it more than wheat in many respects. It's better suited to human nutrition in many ways. And anyway, so it was amazing what we produced. So different colours. There's often the correlation between colour and flavour in wheat, so maybe that happens in barley too. But also we found that some didn't have the same input requirements. So they had really good disease profiles. So, we didn't spray them with anything or tend them in a particular way to address pathogens. They just grew really well on our country. So that's appealing to me. And more so the end user, they want to know that what they're choosing to grow is good for a farmer, but also good for the land. I'm really interested to see from a flavour profile perspective how some of this more diverse cereals, once malted, how they present. Like some of them we've tested really distinct. I guess recently we had a distillery use some of our grain, and across 50 new makes that were assessed by, I'm not sure what the term is, but the sommelier equivalent in the whiskey world. And 3 of ours were in the top 5 choices. And I really think that was because the grain was just different. The
Mhm.
quality of how they were produced wasn't markedly different to other barleys being produced, but the actual grain itself
Was intriguing.
different. Yeah, so it was
It
interesting
captivated them.
to that person. Yeah.
Mm. Hey, if brewers or other grain growers are listening who might be interested in using grains from Tuerong Farm, from one of those 40 different varieties that you've got on offer, even if it's only in small scale,
Yeah.
how do they get in touch with you?
Well, they can give me a call. My phone number's on our website, which is tuerongfarm.com.au.
Which is
Otherwise,
Tuerong.
yep, that's right. Otherwise, they can email me. We'll also have some malted product. It's sold out now this year, but available through Voyager Malt up there at Leeton, which most craft brewers would be familiar with. And we've been speaking with them about what is desirable for their customers, as well as what I think. And I mean, it's a particularly difficult time in I guess the craft brewing market at the moment with the economy, but also consolidation and what have you. But there is still an interest in businesses defining themselves differently than what everyone else is doing. So yeah, diversity of grains part of that. Yeah. The other thing that's important to, I guess, specialising and having a direct relationship with the end user in some way is that it makes farming more enjoyable to have those relationships. So to understand where what you're producing is going, where it's going, and what's being made from it. The relationships are important, but also it just gives a greatest satisfaction to me anyway. So, other than having a viable business and growing a few things in the paddock, those relationships are really important, and not just in the local community, but across our industry. Yeah.
So to finally wrap up, I would like, given that we're talking about craft beer,
Yep.
tell us what your favourite is.
We do like buying it, like the diversity packs, and we do get one from some of my cousins' farm in East Gippsland on the Snowy River there, where they grow mainly corn. And there's a brewer down there, Sailor's Grave. They're do some great things with the diversity of beers, and they have a core range, but they also do some one-offs, and so we get a box of that occasionally, just to enjoy that diversity. I'll try this one, I'll try that one. So enjoy that. There's one, I suppose.
That's a perfect tip of the hat. Good on you.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to Seed to Table, a podcast by Sustainable Table. For those who are interested in learning more about the Good Grain Initiative, head to goodgrain.au. If you're a baker, brewer, farmer, or just interested in learning more about grains in general, you can head to the Good Grain Guide on the Sustainable Table website and explore the resources that we've collated. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe, and perhaps leave us a review. This podcast was produced and edited by Megan O'Malley with music by Matt Fasandia. Special thanks to Jodie Clark, Jess Eddy, Sam Salmon and Erin Taylor for your support.